Hey there, curious minds, and welcome to another intellectual deep dive. Today we're plunging into the profound work of a man who utterly redefined what it means to be human. A thinker who famously quipped that we're not even masters in our own house. We're talking, of course, about the architect of the unconscious, Sigmund Freud. Are you ready to help decipher the intricate map of our own minds? Freud's core idea is so radical that even today, over a century later, it continues to shake us to our core. The notion that beneath the polished surface of our conscious life, our rational decisions, our very identity, lies a dark, churning ocean, an unconscious teeming with desires, traumas, and primal drives that we have no real control over. That is the Freudian revolution. In this audiovisual essay, we're going to piece together that very map. We won't just look at what Freud said, but delve into why he said it. We'll trace the fascinating origins of psychoanalysis, from the perplexing cases of hysteria in turn-of-the-century Vienna, all the way to the construction of his ultimate model of the mind, the renowned id, ego, and superego. And by the end, we'll ask the crucial question, what parts of Freud's legacy still resonate powerfully today? Before we dive in, a quick note. To truly bring this narrative to life, I've utilized artificial intelligence tools to generate the visuals you'll be seeing throughout the video. Think of them as a dynamic canvas, a way to illustrate the complex ideas and evoke the atmosphere of our story. They won't always be a literal representation, but rather a visual companion, designed to spark your imagination and journey with me. I genuinely hope you enjoy the experience. To truly grasp Freud's context, we must transport ourselves back to late 19th century Vienna, the fin de siècle. It was a world of jarring contrasts, a glittering facade of bourgeois respectability, groundbreaking scientific progress, and elegant waltzes. Yet, just beneath that veneer, pulsed a deeply repressed society, simmering with sexual, artistic, and philosophical tensions, all on the verge of eruption. Within this potent cultural cauldron, Sigmund Freud began his career as a rather conventional physician. A brilliant and ambitious neurologist steeped in the materialistic science of his era, he wasn't setting out to revolutionize psychology. His goal was simply to cure patients. But his patients presented a perplexing symptom that baffled medical science: hysteria. Hysteria was a prevalent diagnosis then, almost exclusively affecting women. Patients would experience mysterious symptoms like paralysis, blindness, nervous coughs, or an inability to speak, yet with no apparent organic cause, no observable physical damage to their nerves or brain. The medical community of the era was utterly stumped. Some pioneering figures, like the renowned neurologist Jean-Martin Charcot, even resorted to using hypnosis to study these baffling cases. Freud himself traveled to Paris to study under Charcot and was utterly fascinated. He observed how, under hypnosis, Charcot could both induce and remove hysterical symptoms at will. This revealed something crucial. The symptoms stemmed from a psychic, not a physical cause. The groundbreaking idea that a mere idea could actually sicken the body was nothing short of revolutionary. Freud returned to Vienna with this profound seed planted firmly in his mind. This is where a pivotal figure enters the scene. Dr. Josef Breuer, Freud's esteemed friend and mentor. Breuer was treating a groundbreaking case that would ultimately change history, that of Anna O., a brilliant young woman who suffered from inexplicable paralysis and a severe nervous cough while caring for her ailing father. Breuer stumbled upon something quite by chance, something Anna O. herself famously dubbed the talking cure. Under a state of self-hypnosis, Anna O. began to recount to Breuer the stories hidden behind each of her baffling symptoms. She spoke of traumatic or profoundly disturbing events she had experienced. And they observed something astonishing. After she managed to fully articulate the complete story of a symptom's origin, the symptom itself would vanish. It was as if a trapped emotion was finally liberated. Breuer and Freud went on to publish studies on hysteria in 1895, formally introducing what they termed the cathartic method. Catharsis, in this context, is essentially that purging or release of pent-up emotion. Their theory posited that hysteria was caused by traumatic memories whose emotional charge had never been fully expressed. This strangled emotion, they argued, would then be diverted and converted into a physical symptom. Talking quite simply was the cure, but Freud soon noticed a critical problem. Hypnosis simply didn't work for everyone. And more importantly, he wondered, why were those memories inaccessible in the first place? Breuer believed they formed in an altered mental state. Freud, however, proposed a far more radical and controversial idea: repression. He argued that it wasn't passive forgetting, it was an active mental process, a deliberate act of the mind. Freud suggested these memories were traumatic precisely because they were unacceptable to the patient's conscious moral framework, often being sexual or aggressive in nature. The mind, he theorized, would repress them, actively pushing them out of conscious awareness as a form of self-protection. This particular idea, especially its stark connection to sexuality, proved too much for Breuer, and their pioneering friendship ultimately fractured. Now working alone, Freud abandoned hypnosis altogether and developed his signature technique, free association. Instead of inducing a trance, he simply asked the patient, reclining on that now famous couch, to say absolutely everything that came to mind, without censorship, no matter how trivial, absurd, or seemingly shameful it appeared. The couch itself played a role, as not being able to see the analyst helped to lower the patient's inhibitions and censorship. Freud listened intently, much like a detective. He paid meticulous attention to lapsus linguae, or Freudian slips, those telling errors in speech that often betray a hidden desire, to hesitations and to topics the patient conspicuously avoided. He realized that repression was still very much active. A powerful resistance actively blocked repressed material from surfacing. His primary task then was to gently bring this resistance into awareness and analyze it. It was through free association that Freud became utterly convinced of his most profound discovery. The human mind was not a unified entity. It was in fact fundamentally divided. There existed a vast hidden territory beyond our conscious control that nevertheless powerfully dictated our feelings, decisions, and even our symptoms. He had uncovered the dynamic unconscious. To help visualize this groundbreaking concept, Freud proposed what he called his first topography, essentially the initial map of the mind. This is where the famous iceberg metaphor comes in. What we perceive above the waterline is the conscious. This encompasses our current perceptions, our thoughts at this precise moment. It's just the tip, a very small fraction of the mind's entire vastness. Just beneath the waterline lies the preconscious. This contains material that isn't currently in our conscious awareness, but which we can easily access if we choose to. Think about what you had for dinner last night or the name of your first grade teacher. It's right there, readily available. It's essentially ordinary memory, often described as the waiting room of consciousness. And then finally, there's the immense mass of ice hidden deep in the dark, murky depths, the unconscious. This is the realm where primal drives, deeply repressed memories, and utterly unacceptable desires reside. This material is not voluntarily accessible to us. It's heavily censored. And yet, from these unseen depths, this giant hidden mass powerfully directs the movement of the entire iceberg, profoundly influencing our lives. But if the unconscious is so deeply repressed and heavily censored, how can we ever hope to glimpse what lies within? Freud believed he found a secret back door, one that opens every single night. In 1900, he published what he considered his magnum opus, The Interpretation of Dreams. His thesis was audacious. Dreams are the via regia, the royal road to the unconscious. For Freud, dreams were never mere random neuronal noise. They had a profound purpose. They were, in essence, the fulfillment of a wish. He argued that during sleep, the censorship mechanism that guards our conscious mind partially relaxes. This temporary loosening allows repressed desires from the unconscious, often infantile or socially unacceptable wishes, to finally break through and surface. But this censorship doesn't vanish entirely. If the raw, unfiltered desire were to present itself as is, it would be so profoundly disturbing that it would instantly jolt us awake. So the dream has to disguise the underlying wish. What we remember upon waking, the strange, often absurd narrative of the dream, is what Freud termed the manifest content. The true underlying meaning, the repressed unconscious wish that actually generated the dream, is what's known as the latent content. The task of psychoanalysis, then, is to reverse this intricate process, to interpret the dream, moving from the manifest disguise back to the latent wish. And how is this disguise engineered? Through what Freud famously called the dream work. The dream work employs several key mechanisms. Condensation, for instance. In a dream, a single figure might represent multiple people at once. Say, your mother, your boss, and your romantic partner all merged into one. Or displacement, where the intense emotion associated with one object, like deep resentment towards your father, is shifted or displaced onto an apparently neutral object, perhaps an unfamiliar animal. This meticulous analysis of dreams, combined with free association, became Freud's foundational toolkit for mapping the unconscious. But as he continued to develop his theories, he inevitably stumbled upon the subject that would make him both infamous and utterly central to his life's work: sexuality. And even more controversially, infantile sexuality. This was and remains arguably his most controversial contribution. He wasn't discussing physical relationships between adults in the way we commonly understand them. Instead, he radically redefined the concept of the drive for fulfillment in its broadest sense. He proposed a fundamental psychic drive, a basic energy oriented towards pleasure, present from birth. This energy, he argued, simply shifts its focus as a person develops and matures. He went on to develop his groundbreaking theory of developmental stages. He argued that this core energy focuses on different pleasure centers in distinct phases. First, the oral stage, centered on the pleasure of the mouth. Then the stage related to bodily control, involving pleasure and conflict with elimination. And finally, a stage marked by the discovery of the primary anatomical differences between the sexes. According to Freud, if a child experienced either excessive frustration or excessive gratification during one of these stages, they could develop a fixation. This implied that as an adult, a portion of their core energy would remain stuck or arrested at that particular stage, and their adult personality would then unconsciously reflect those unresolved conflicts. For example, manifesting as a dependent oral personality or an obsessive controlling personality type. It's during this phallic phase, typically between ages 3 to 6, that Freud introduced his most famous and arguably most contentious concept, the Oedipus complex. Drawing directly from Sophocles' ancient Greek tragedy, where Oedipus unknowingly kills his father and marries his mother, Freud proposed that this represents a universal psychological drama playing out within every developing child. In its simplest form, the male child develops a nascent sexual desire for the mother and perceives the father as a formidable rival for her affection. This dynamic generates immense anxiety, specifically the castration complex, the profound fear that the more powerful father will retaliate and punish him. It's a complex psychological cocktail of love, hate, desire, and fear, all unfolding within the child's unconscious mind. According to Freud, the healthy resolution of this complex occurs when the child eventually renounces his desire for the mother, and rather than competing with the father, instead begins to identify with him. Think of it as, I want to be like dad. It is through this crucial identification that the child internalizes the father's authority, his moral code, and societal norms. This process, Freud argued, is absolutely fundamental. It is the crucible where our gender identity, our sexual orientation, and most significantly, our moral conscience are forged. Freud did propose a parallel complex for girls, known as the Electra complex, though this was always far more problematic and remains one of the most heavily criticized aspects of his entire body of work. The iceberg model, conscious, preconscious, unconscious, served Freud well for decades. But in the aftermath of World War I, and after observing the soldiers' disturbing compulsion to repeat, reliving their trauma in relentless nightmares, he sensed his existing map was incomplete. Something crucial was missing. That missing piece, he concluded, was aggression. In 1920, he published Beyond the Pleasure Principle. In this groundbreaking work, he proposed two fundamental opposing drives. First, eros, the life drive, which encompasses the core life force and strives to create, unite, and build. And second, thanatos, the drive toward dissolution, an inherent, often unconscious tendency towards disintegration, opposition, and ultimately, a return to an inorganic state, the serene calm of non-existence. This new expanded theory of drives necessitated a revised map of the mind. In 1923, Freud unveiled his second topography, what's commonly known as the structural model. Crucially, this didn't replace his first model, but rather complemented and deepened it. This is the famous trio we've all likely heard named, though often widely misunderstood, the id, the ego, and the superego. Let's start at the very bottom with the id, from the Latin for it. The id is the most primitive, instinctual part of our mind. It is pure, untamed drive, the bubbling cauldron of eros and thanatos. It's almost entirely unconscious. It knows no logic, no morality, and no concept of time. It obeys only one relentless law, the pleasure principle. It wants immediate gratification, and it wants it now. Freud famously described it as a chaos. It is raw, unadulterated psychic energy. A newborn baby, for instance, is pure id. It's hungry and it cries relentlessly until it's fed. It cannot wait. This primitive force is the wellspring of all our desires. But the id, left to its own devices, cannot survive because it constantly clashes with the harsh realities of the external world. To effectively navigate and deal with the external world, a portion of the id undergoes modification and develops into the ego, from the Latin for I. If the id is the wild, untamed horse, the ego is its rider. The ego is the psychological instance that operates according to the reality principle. Its crucial job is to mediate. It's the executive of the personality, the rational decision maker. The ego endeavors to satisfy the id's desires, but it does so in a realistic, socially acceptable, and long-term manner. The ego is the voice that says, wait, plan ahead, think about the consequences. While the ego is largely conscious, it also contains significant preconscious and unconscious components. It's not our soul, it's more like a highly complex manager or mediator. But the ego doesn't just contend with the id, the wild horse, and external reality, the challenging road. It faces a third formidable master, a harsh, ever-present critic perched on its shoulder. This is the superego, from the Latin for over I. This is the last psychological instance to develop, typically forming from the crucial resolution of the Oedipus complex. The superego represents the internalization of moral norms, prohibitions, and the ideals instilled by our parents and society at large. It is, in essence, our moral conscience. It's often divided into two parts: the conscience itself, which punishes us with intense guilt when we do something wrong, and the ego ideal, which dictates how we should strive to be, setting our aspirations and standards. So picture the beleaguered ego. Freud famously stated that the ego serves three harsh masters. It's constantly trying to appease the id. Give me pleasure and give it to me now. The superego, no, that's wrong, you must be perfect. And reality itself, you can't do that. It's dangerous or simply impossible. It's an incessant internal battle. And when this battle spirals out of control, we experience anxiety. Anxiety, according to Freud, is a crucial signal of impending danger. It's the ego's desperate cry, warning that it's about to be overwhelmed. He distinguished three types: realistic anxiety, a rational fear of the external world; neurotic anxiety, a fear that the id's primitive impulses will run rampant and lead to punishment; and moral anxiety, a fear of the superego's harsh guilt and condemnation. So how exactly does the ego defend itself against these onslaughts of anxiety? This is where one of Freud's most useful and enduring concepts comes into play: the defense mechanisms. These are unconscious automatic strategies that the ego employs to protect itself from overwhelming anxiety, often by subtly distorting reality. Think of them as the mind's built-in circuit breakers preventing the entire system from collapsing under pressure. The foundational defense mechanism, the one we've already discussed, is repression. This is simply pushing a threatening thought, memory, or desire deep into the unconscious, essentially forgetting it. But there are many others. Denial, for instance, is refusing to accept an obvious, uncomfortable reality. It's the mind saying that no, this isn't happening, or that's not true. Then there's projection. Instead of admitting an unacceptable feeling within oneself, I secretly hate my boss, the ego projects that feeling onto someone else. My boss actually hates me. We see in others what we simply cannot bear to acknowledge within ourselves. This is an incredibly common and often destructive mechanism in social and political conflicts. Next up is displacement. You feel immense, bubbling rage towards your boss, an authority figure you can't challenge. Unable to express it, you come home and instead yell at your partner, or perhaps even kick the dog. The raw emotion is the same, but it's displaced onto a less threatening, more permissible target. It's a deeply ineffective and often damaging coping strategy. Rationalization is arguably the most intellectual of the defense mechanisms. It's about inventing a logical and socially acceptable explanation for a behavior or feeling that was, in reality, driven by the primitive impulses of the id. For example, I failed the exam because the professor has it in for me, rather than admitting I simply didn't study. It's truly the art of self-justification. Reaction formation is a particularly fascinating defense mechanism. It involves behaving in a way that is the exact opposite of a repressed desire or impulse. For instance, someone with deeply repressed homosexual impulses might become a militant homophobe, or an individual with strong aggressive drives might become excessively kind and subservient. It's a very rigid, often transparent disguise. And finally, we arrive at the mechanism considered the most mature and ultimately most successful: sublimation. Here, the ego doesn't block or merely divert the id's powerful drives. Instead, it transforms them entirely. It channels that raw, sexual, or aggressive psychic energy towards socially valued, productive, and creative endeavors, such as art, scientific discovery, athletic pursuits, or intellectual work. For this thinker, civilization itself is the ultimate product of sublimation. All the immense energy that fuels our grand works of art, our awe-inspiring cathedrals, and our groundbreaking scientific discoveries is, at its core, this fundamental drive diverted from its purely physical aim. It's the alchemical process of transforming the lead of raw impulse into the gold of culture and societal achievement. With this comprehensive model, the id, ego, superego, and their intricate dance with defense mechanisms, Freud had his ultimate complete theory. Neurosis, or mental illness, he posited, is nothing more than the outcome of poorly managed psychic conflict. It's a weak ego constantly overwhelmed by an overly demanding id, a relentlessly punishing superego, or a set of defenses that have become far too rigid. And this brings us full circle, back to therapy itself. What then is the ultimate goal of psychoanalysis? If hysteria was famously described as suffering from reminiscences, as Freud put it, the initial cure was simply to remember. But now with the full structural model, the objective is far more complex: to strengthen the ego. It is to make the unconscious conscious. The analyst's intricate work, while carefully listening to free association, is to identify the recurring patterns. They observe how early childhood conflicts, such as the Oedipal complex, are being unconsciously repeated and reenacted in the patient's adult life. They meticulously note the defense mechanisms being employed, and then, at the precisely opportune moment, they offer a crucial interpretation. This interpretation connects a current symptom, perhaps anxiety at work, with a specific defense, like always blaming bosses, and critically, with an unconscious origin, my unresolved childhood conflict with my father. It's a slow, painstaking process of working through, where the patient must repeatedly confront, see, and ultimately accept these deeply intertwined connections. The single most powerful tool for this working through is transference. Freud observed that, almost inevitably, the patient begins to feel and react towards the analyst in much the same way they did towards key figures from their own childhood, such as their parents. They unconsciously project their entire unresolved childhood drama onto the analyst. The analyst effectively becomes the object of the patient's projected love, hate, rivalry, or dependence. And this is pure gold, because now the conflict isn't just a vague, distant memory, it's alive, actively playing out right there in the consulting room. The analyst crucially doesn't react personally. Instead, they analyze the transference, gently showing the patient their ingrained pattern in real time. By analyzing the transference, the patient can finally understand their ingrained patterns, experience them in a new light, and ultimately resolve them. Freud's ultimate vision for psychoanalysis was deeply humanistic and profoundly inspired by the Enlightenment. His most famous phrase encapsulates it all: "And where it was, there ego shall be." It means where blind, unthinking impulse once reigned, reason, self-awareness, and conscious choice must now prevail. Freud certainly didn't work in a vacuum. His nascent movement grew rapidly, and the psychoanalytic circle in Vienna attracted some of the most brilliant minds of the era. However, the father of psychoanalysis was himself a notoriously dogmatic figure, and it wasn't long before significant ruptures and what he considered heresies began to emerge. The two most famous ruptures occurred with Alfred Adler and Carl Jung. Adler in particular couldn't accept the absolute emphasis on that core drive. For him, the fundamental impulse wasn't the pleasure-oriented drive, but rather the striving for significance, or the drive to overcome challenges, which he believed stemmed from an early life feeling of inadequacy. His was a much more socially oriented psychology. Carl Jung, whom Freud initially viewed as his crown prince and intellectual successor, experienced an even more profound break. Jung accepted the concept of the unconscious, but felt Freud's version was too individual and overly negative. Jung famously proposed the collective unconscious, a reservoir of universal archetypes, such as the shadow, the anima animus, the wise old man, shared by all humanity, expressed through myths, symbols, and religions. These foundational ruptures ultimately gave rise to the diverse schools of depth psychology we know today. But beyond his own disciples, Freud's original body of work faced, and continues to face, fierce criticism. Perhaps the most famous critique came from the philosopher of science Karl Popper, who, in the 1950s, posed a devastating question. Popper argued that for any theory to be truly scientific, it must be falsifiable. That is, it must make a clear prediction that, if proven wrong, would definitively demonstrate the theory itself is false. For instance, the theory of gravity predicts that if I drop this apple, it will fall. If it were to float upwards, the theory would be in serious trouble. The core problem with psychoanalysis, Popper contended, is that it simply isn't falsifiable. It operates as a closed system capable of explaining everything. If a man heroically dives into a river to save a child, it's sublimation. If he pushes a child into the river, it's a repressed death drive. If he does nothing at all, it's repression. There's no possible outcome that could ever genuinely contradict the theory. For Popper, this didn't mean Freud was useless. It simply meant psychoanalysis wasn't a science. He saw it more as a modern myth, a compelling framework for interpretation, perhaps closer to philosophy or literature than to empirical biology. This powerful critique continues to hound psychoanalysis to this very day, especially within university psychology departments now dominated by cognitive behavioral therapy, behaviorism, and neuroscience. Another, equally powerful wave of criticism came from the burgeoning feminist movement. Influential thinkers like Simone de Beauvoir and Kate Millett argued that Freud's psychoanalysis wasn't a universal map of the human mind at all, but rather a narrow portrait of the bourgeois, turn-of-the-century Viennese mind. And crucially, it was profoundly androcentric. Concepts like envy of the male form, the notion that female development is fundamentally defined by the lack of the male organ, were widely seen as a thinly veiled rationalization of patriarchy. Feminist scholars vehemently argued that what Freud interpreted as a biological drama, females are anatomically incomplete, was in reality a profound social drama, the systemic repression of women by society. Freud himself, in his later years, openly admitted his perplexity. In a famously poignant quote, he mused, "The great question that has never been answered, and which I, despite my 30 years of research into the feminine soul, have still been unable to answer, is, what does a woman want?" For his feminist critics, the response was clear and cutting, not to be defined by you. Finally, there's the pervasive criticism of efficacy. Does psychoanalysis really work? It's an incredibly lengthy treatment, often spanning years, sometimes even decades, and it's notoriously expensive. More modern evidence-based therapies, such as cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, have proven to be far quicker and demonstrably more effective for specific symptoms like phobias or mild depression, primarily by focusing on the here and now rather than dwelling on the past. With the dramatic rise of biological psychiatry, the compelling idea that mental health issues are primarily chemical imbalances, and the widespread development of powerful pharmaceutical drugs like Prozac in the 80s and 90s, many declared Freud dead and buried. He was dismissed as a mere relic, an interesting intellectual dinosaur, but ultimately superseded by modern science. Freud himself was forced to flee Vienna in 1938 when the Nazis annexed Austria. His groundbreaking books were publicly burned. The irony is tragically poignant. The movement that sought to liberate the mind from repression was relentlessly persecuted by perhaps the most brutally repressive regime in all of history. He died in exile in London in 1939, just as the world was plunging headlong into the very madness he had spent his life trying to explain. So, with all these heavy criticisms leveled against him, why do we still talk about Freud? What exactly is his enduring legacy? Is he merely a dusty museum piece? I firmly believe he is not. I think his legacy is so profound, so woven into the fabric of our thinking, that it has almost become invisible. We've absorbed it completely without even realizing it. Freud changed the very air we breathe. His impact on 20th century culture is utterly incalculable. The surrealist art of Salvador Dali, for instance, is a direct, vivid attempt to paint the Freudian unconscious. Cinema, from Alfred Hitchcock's Spellbound to the mind-bending films of David Lynch or Christopher Nolan's Inception, remains utterly obsessed with dreams, repressed traumas, and hidden identities. Modern literature, with its stream of consciousness technique, is a direct attempt to capture the unfiltered flow of the preconscious mind. And above all, our everyday language is utterly saturated with Freudian concepts. When we casually refer to a Freudian slip, when we say someone is repressed, has a fixation, or is rationalizing their behavior, we are often unknowingly using his very map of the human psyche. Even modern neuroscience, which initially seemed poised to utterly refute Freud, is now beginning to find intriguing echoes of his ideas. Researchers like Mark Solms, using fMRI to study dreams, have discovered that, indeed, the brain regions associated with logic and critical censorship tend to power down during sleep, while those linked to raw emotion and desire light up, precisely as Freud predicted over a century ago. The profound idea that the vast majority of our mental life operates unconsciously is now a fundamental pillar of modern cognitive psychology. We know, for example, that we often make decisions seconds before we become consciously aware of having made them. The ego isn't the sovereign king in its castle. It is, as Freud aptly put it, more like a spokesperson who only gets the news last. And the talking cure, that revolutionary concept, still underpins not only modern psychoanalysis, but almost every single form of psychotherapy practiced today. The profound idea that articulating our pain, that constructing a coherent narrative of our suffering with an empathetic, non-judgmental witness is inherently curative, that is the enduring gift of Anna O, and of course of Freud. Ultimately, Freud's true legacy isn't a definitive set of answers, but rather a profound collection of deeper, more probing questions. Perhaps psychoanalysis isn't a science in the strictest empirical sense, but rather a hermeneutics, an art of interpretation, a way of understanding meaning. Freud didn't hand us the final truth about who we are. Instead, he gave us something far more valuable. He gave us a powerful method to question our own certainties. He taught us how to read between the lines of our own lives. He compelled us to take our dreams, our everyday slips, our jokes, and our perplexing symptoms seriously. He told us, with unwavering conviction, that nothing is accidental. He gifted us a language, a framework, to explore the vast, often dark, and utterly terrifying complexity of being human. Freud isn't a rigid dogma we must blindly believe. He is a vital, ongoing conversation we must continue to have. A conversation about desire, about power, about morality, and the inherent price we pay for living together in civilization. And that, more than a century later, is a conversation we are truly just beginning to fully grapple with. The map is laid out before us. The question is, do we dare to explore it? Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for joining me on this profound dive into the world of Sigmund Freud. It's been a dense and perhaps challenging journey, but I truly hope it's been illuminating, and that it's given you fresh tools for thinking about your own mind and the complex culture that surrounds us. Deep thought, after all, always takes time. If this deep dive into the complexities of psychoanalysis has resonated with you and you'd like to support this kind of thoughtful content, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell. It's truly the best way to ensure we can continue to have these important conversations together. And now I'd absolutely love to hear your thoughts. What's the one Freudian idea that impacts you the most, or perhaps one you vehemently reject? Do you believe his intricate map of the mind still holds relevance today, or do you see it as a fascinating relic of the past? Please share your reflections in the comments section below. I truly enjoy reading how these complex ideas resonate with all of you. This, of course, is just the beginning. There are so many more profound thinkers, so many more complex ideas for us to deconstruct together. Thank you for dedicating your valuable time and attention to this video. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep thinking deeply. Until our next intellectual journey,